I think you said that he could have gotten more separation.
There were some technique fundamentals in receiver that weren't perfect in the 80s. I had to throw a few points at Crispin.
You hate to see a game where there was that many points scored and was that exciting and that many swings in momentum, etc., effectively get ended by ref.
What was it like playing in March Madness? I mean, we have it going on right now.
But playing it was amazing. I mean, like, that's kind of your whole goal, is to just be a part of that. It's such a special thing where the whole country is tuning in, and anything is really possible, you know.
When you first started playing football, you know, did you always want to play in college?
No, I was growing up, I was a big baseball guy, loved baseball. And then 8th grade, I remember I got a call from my uncle, Coach Nagel. He's like, hey, I got the job. And I was just like, all right, I'll play football for you.
Like the video if you like the video. Ring the notification bells. Have a phenomenal weekend. As always, we'll catch you in the next one.
You are listening to the Mark Lesko Podcast, a podcast by diehard fans for fans. It's as honest and as raw as sports talk can be. Thank you for listening to the Mark Lesko Podcast.
Hey everybody, this is Greg Garrity.
So Anthony Lottie will punt it away from the 41. Greg Garrity is the deep man for Penn State at the 10-yard line.
Former Penn State receiver and 2016 Big Ten champion. You're listening to the best Penn State Nittany Lion podcast, the Mark Lesko Podcast.
All right, everybody. Welcome back into another episode of the Mark Lesko Podcast here. Mark and Austin Show. Going to be talking some basketball today. And we're joined by Penn State legend, Joe Crispin. Joe, it's great to have you on. How you doing
Appreciate
today?
It. Good to be on. Always good to talk hoops, especially maybe some old Penn State stories and hopefully Penn State future.
Oh, yeah, we're going to get into that, Joe, for sure. But, yeah, man, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. You know, as a kid, I've always been a Penn State fan, but I remember when you played. I remember when Tyler Smith played, who we had on here before. One of your friends, and I remember that run in the NCAA tournament. You know, I was like 8 or 9 years old when that happened.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So, yeah, just I remember I used to, I told Tyler this too when I worked for his cryotherapy business. You know, I couldn't afford a jersey, but I used to get a white T-shirt. I put a number 3 on it for your
That's
jersey.
Awesome. That's awesome. That's what it's all about. That's what I always I tell my own kids that. You have a son that's 18 now. I'm always like, if you can help young guys capture the imagination and enjoy the game of basketball and use your imagination in the driveway, that to me is the greatest of compliments for sure.
Yeah, Joe, you were really exciting to watch, and that team overall was really exciting to watch. So, you know, as a fan as a fan of Penn State, you know, thank you for what you did at Penn State. You to this day, you know, you guys are the furthest team to make it in March Madness. So
yeah, we're trying now that I'm back with Coach Rhodes, we're trying to make that a little more normal. I always say I try to make myself a little bit less of a legend because we want more Sweet 16 appearances or Elite Eights or Final Fours. But you know what? This is a place that I love. People always ask me, like, what were your favorite places to play? And I always say Pittman and Penn State, right? Like, I played at Pittman High School. It was a small community. I knew a ton of people in the gym. It was a longevity thing, right? Like, you're prepping to play high school basketball and trying to win a state championship in this little small stage for your community. And then that was the same thing here. I always felt like the gifts, the work you put in, the gifts you have are for other people. Right. And I think when you have that mentality, I had that overseas, and I always felt like I was able to connect with people, even though you don't speak the language or whatever, is like they know when you're playing for them. Like when you're doing it, it's not just about you or a paycheck or whatever. You're playing for the community. Right. And you're giving your all for the community. And certainly I had my way of playing. I like to say I ignored all the experts. So people at the time didn't. Nowadays it would be cool to be Joe Crispin. Back then I was cool to the young guys, maybe like yourself, but I was crazy to most of the old heads and maybe the coaches in the audience with the way I played. I used to always joke that when I'd go overseas, people were like, "I love the way you play." I'm like, "Well, I'm glad you love it because my coach probably doesn't always love it." But that was the way I played. I tried to play with my gut and go for it and be aggressive, and failed plenty, succeeded just enough. And that's the way I look at the game of basketball, right? It's a game of soul. It's a game of the gut. It's a game of, man, let's make this thing fun. Let's get up and down. Let's hoop. Let's ball. Let's play. So did that for a long time as a player, and now I get to try to do that and help others do that as a coach.
Yeah. So speaking of well, Joe, I know you're a coach now at Penn State, and it's great to have you back. And my just short story, my father went to Penn State. I worked at Paterno Library for 35 years. He just retired, and
Wow.
huge Penn State fan. His senior year was when they won the national title, so he obviously remembers you too.
I probably saw him in the library one or two times.
You probably did. You probably did. Yeah. He moved around quite a bit because they used to be down where the Knowledge Commons is now, and then he was fifth floor Paterno. So he was all over the place. But I talk about fans like that, and with football, we were always used to success and always having a winning season and postseason play and national titles. So for these diehard Penn State football fans to be excited about a basketball team, that was you guys. So what was it like playing for Penn State? Like, why did you go to Penn State?
Well, it's funny. I had a vision for playing at Penn State for quite a time. My story is really odd. I mean, I knew Danny Earl because he was a South Jersey guy. So really, we followed Penn State football. I would root for Penn State football, but it wasn't like we were Penn State people there in South Jersey. I had never been up there, but I remember watching a game. This is true about Rec Hall. I shared this story about Rec Hall when we played there this year. I was watching a game my sophomore year. We were at Dickinson College doing like a visit practice because one of our coach's sons played there, and there was a game on at Rec Hall. And I forget the game, but it was a great environment. And I remember watching it in the rec center going, I want to play there. And that was the first genesis, and it kind of came out of nowhere, and then it just faded. It wasn't like I kept thinking about it. I was just focused on getting better. And my senior year, I kind of ignored recruiting. I just was like, we're just gonna win, and that's all I cared about. And there was a couple teams that were like mid majors and Atlantic 10 that were interested, and took a couple visits. And then I took a visit after my senior year, and I didn't know that Bob Hurley Sr. had seen the last game John and I played in the Tournament of Champions. He'd seen a half of it. And he had called Coach Dunn the next day because Coach was recruiting their point guard and said, listen, this kid's the best point guard in the state. You should recruit him. And I didn't know that, but I had just gone on a visit to William and Mary. Loved the coaching staff, but didn't think the players were serious enough about hoops for me. Came back, and this is before cell phones or anything else. My mom picked me up from the airport, and she said, guess who called? And there might have been some rumblings that Penn State was going to call, but she said, guess who called? And I said, Penn State. And she said, yeah. I said, yeah, that's where I'm going.
Wow.
Sure enough, within 2 weeks, I took an unofficial, walked across campus, ate a double cheeseburger at McDonald's, looked at the Jordan Center, and said, yep, I'm in. That was it. It was like, this is where I belong. This is home for me. And I was the last scholarship. And people would have said, I mean, my own dad was like, I don't know if you can play here. He was a high school coach. He was hilarious. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, of course I'm going to play here. I'm going to light this place up. That was the way I thought at age, I think I was only 17 at the time. And I just knew, like, this is the place. And I think part of the attraction was like they were okay at the time. They had a down year that year before, but the year before that they were good. It's the Big Ten. It's a new thing. They weren't that good, right? We weren't that good. Yeah. I liked that, right? When we talk about like program kind of people, there's some guys who don't want to pour concrete, right? They don't want to build the foundation or even the beginnings of the first floor, framing out the walls and those kind of things. There are people who want to renovate houses. There's people who want to build houses. There's people who want to just live in a nice house, right? That's what I said. And I'm one of those guys that doesn't matter what house I move into, I'm going to renovate it and redo it. And I'm a foundation guy. Like I want to make something great, right? Put an imprint on it. So I think I was attracted to that precisely for the reason that we didn't have a ton of banners in the rafters. And I was like, no, I want to get something going here, right? And when I got done, I people thought I had done something, and I was like, man, no, I wanted to do more. So that's a big reason why I always wanted to come back and why I jumped at the chance to come with Coach Rhodes is because I felt like, well, there was more to be done 20 some years ago. So now it's time to get rolling on that and to make a lot of those things happen.
Yeah, that's definitely a good mindset to have, Joe. The fact that you wanted to come in and change it and make a huge difference, which as fans you definitely did. But I understand what you're saying, that you wanted to probably go to the Final Four or win a national championship. And I remember when you beat North Carolina, you guys, and that was a good team. I think they were a 2 seed, and
Yep.
I mean, you had the number 1 pick in the NFL draft on that team.
Yeah.
So
He's a boss.
and Ronald Curry was on that team. He's one of the greatest high school players of all time. Played with Michael Vick, but
Yep.
that was a really good team. And I remember when I interviewed Tyler, I thought Dean Smith was still the coach of UNC at the time, but he wasn't. Missed him by I think a couple years. But
Yep.
what was your favorite moment at Penn State? I'm sure of all the moments you've had, college, NBA, high school, your favorite memory, especially based off what you're saying, was at Penn State. What would you
Yeah,
say?
that run was a favorite. I think the story I always tell is just in preparation for that run. People often forget. I always tell our teams like there's no script, right? There's no like perfect script. There's no like this is the story for the season and here's step one and here's chapter one. It's like every season is its own adventure. And certainly that season was, right? We had some serious highs, serious lows, like the grind of the Big Ten. We weren't a super deep team. We lost some games we shouldn't have, maybe won a few we shouldn't have. And the big one was the win against Michigan State. My boys were actually, I got 3 boys, and my 2 youngest were asking me about that yesterday, actually. Um, just kind of how that all played out. And I was like, well, this team just won the national championship last year. They were a top 5 team all year, right? We're not supposed to have a chance to beat them. We probably need to beat them to get off the bubble or even just to make, have a chance. And we win that game. And I played out of my mind for the last 12 or 13 minutes of the game, literally, like it was a zone experience of just like a gift of how good I felt. And our other guys stepped up and hit big shots and just things worked out. Um, when you have those, the Sweet 16 was interesting because I wanted to go to the Final Four, right? So the way I'm wired, it's like we're in the tournament. Of course, we go to the Sweet 16, right? Like that's the way this works, right? You're supposed to do this. I did not appreciate. This is true. I tell people I did not appreciate the Sweet 16 run for what it actually was until probably 12 or 13, 14 years later when I retired from playing. So I was actually home in March. I was in the United States in March. I was never watching March Madness and following it with people watching March Madness. And I realized like, oh, this is the second weekend. Everyone in the country is watching these games. This is a really big, like to get to the second weekend is way harder than I realized at the time. I was like, well, of course we win this weekend. Like, I don't care who these guys are, right? That was our mindset. That was the whole team's mindset is we just kind of looked, we didn't, we didn't see ourselves the way other people did, put it that way. And clearly I never did. My brother never did. Titus Ivory's wired the same way. Jossie, Tyler, like we just looked, our guys coming off the bench, Sharice Shambus, Brandon Watkins, who's like a 5'11", 160-pound guard. Like he didn't see himself like that. And it's amazing when you get a group like that and you're playing North Carolina and they're trying to show how much swagger they got. And we're looking at them like, what are you talking about? Like, we're going to smoke you. Like, we got done the game and I was like, we should have beat them by 20, right? I didn't even shoot well enough. That's the way we thought. Um, but that run obviously was, the best memory. I think the biggest thing about it that I tell people is like, when you win like that and you realize how much it rallies the community, right? That's what my vision always was. I articulate it now as a coach. I did it as a pro. It was like my vision was this is for others to be excited about, right? So I love hearing stories of like guys I'm working with now who are like, man, I almost got in trouble for riding on the streets in Beaver Canyon. It's like, yeah, that's fun. We love that. Where you come home and people are excited and pep rallies, and then more people are coming down to Georgia and they're like traveling for this thing. You're like, that's a taste. That's what we always wanted. And I think that's where the real joy is realizing like this is this brought excitement and enthusiasm to everyone. Because that's, it's not just about winning for us in this little cocoon. It's for the whole community.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, I feel like that's
awesome.
I feel like that's really good for the Penn State community too, because everybody's so tight knit with athletics in general, including basketball. Obviously, up and down seasons in the past 10 years, but one thing I will say is the students usually always turned out in force for a lot of those ball games. Another question too. I don't know if we talked about it. What got you into basketball, like out of the gate, like your first experience with basketball ever as a kid?
Yeah, my dad was a high school coach. My grandfather was a junior college coach. My uncle, pretty soon after, when I was young, was another high school coach. Um, my dad was actually, when I was young, my dad was actually coaching one of my uncles at his local high school, his former high school. My dad was a young high school coach. So like we loved basketball was number one in the Crispin house. My grandfather played at Temple in the 50s with the Final Four team. My dad was a really good player, played football at Villanova, but probably could have played basketball. Um, he, and then, so like basketball, we just love sports in our house. Like I just grew up loving sports, and then my brother and I come along, and my parents were young. So we were just playing. We were always playing. My dad was playing with us. We're playing in the kitchen. We're playing in the backyard. We're playing something. And then I would live at the high school gym, right? My brother and I would come to practice and we were ball boys from the moment we could walk. So we were really examples of just like organic. My dad would play in men's leagues. He'd play in, stuff like he was still hooping when we were young. So basketball was just in the blood, so to speak. It was just the air we breathed. And I took a quick liking to it, of course. I think it was just kind of inevitable, just being surrounded with it. But back then it was more organic. It wasn't like, I have all these leagues for kids that I started back in Jersey and all this other stuff. Back then it was like I didn't start playing any sort of organized ball until I was in third grade. Then it was like only semi-organized little in-house stuff. I didn't play in a league till I think I was in fifth grade. Didn't have any summer leagues. It was just you just played, man. You just go to the park and you play, and you go to another park and play with some old guys at the local gym. And I loved that growing up as a kid. A lot of kids lack that. It's disappeared today, frankly. And that's where I learned to love the game. It was just playing the game, and then naturally you go to camps and you start learning some things and refining some things and getting to work on your game. But for me, basketball was just it, and I love playing baseball. I played football. I played soccer. I did all this other stuff, but it always came back to basketball for us. And I knew that was like when you had the neighborhood kids, everyone kind of had their different sports they were better at. And I always wanted to excel at everything, but it was just common knowledge that like, well, I'm going to be better than all of you at basketball for sure. So, that's how John and I grew up.
That's awesome. And I think you make a good point too. A lot of that kind of organic community growth through athletics has kind of gone away a little bit, especially now, especially when you get into the higher levels with kind of what's going on with collegiate sports now as well. It's not even remotely close to being the same. Definitely some challenges there, some positives too. you can acknowledge as well. But definitely a different landscape. Mark, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, Joe, I appreciate the fact that you talked about the community so much because, like I mentioned at the beginning, I was part of that community, and you know, we had like Penn State has obviously a huge loyal fan base, largest living alumni in the world. So if the basketball team were to, and I think it's inevitable at this point with everything that Coach Rhodes is doing and you being there and all the great players they have coming in, it's unbelievable. Coach Rhodes is like Franklin when it comes to recruiting. I mean, he's getting a ton of good, highly ranked guys. So if you guys, when you guys make a run, that fan base is going to be there, and we're going to be watching for sure. So I think in my opinion, it's inevitable at this point. But Joe, we could probably get into your NBA career if there's nothing else you want to say about your Penn State career as a player.
I think to your point, like with the community, this is true for a lot of schools, but I tell our recruits all the time when we do, presentations or we're talking to people, is like, even though this is a big place and it's a big brand, it's still a small town. It still operates like a small town. And there's a lot of places like that. I think sometimes though it's easy to lose sight of that and kind of forget that as you venture into the big thing. It doesn't matter how big it gets, it still is like that. Right? I played overseas and I think that's a good thing, right? I think the context for sports is community, right? Without community, like what is it? Right? That's what it is. You're forming community by playing with and against each other. You're building community by representing someone with the name across the chest. Like that's why we're here, right? It's why we exist. But I think, having played overseas, that's the way it works, right? In our professional sports world, um, it's all big cities, more or less. It's city teams for big markets and TV markets and more fans to be able to get to games, etc. When you go overseas, you have smaller communities that have big teams, right? That develop big brands, and then compete against the big schools, right? The big city, whatever. And the interesting thing about college athletics, even though we're becoming increasingly professionalized, is we're still small town community based, right? And so you could be a big thing in a small community, and I think it's easy to lose sight of that. But I think when you can connect coaches and players to that mission, it's just more enjoyable, right? And people know it, even if it's not a long stay, right? It's like it's okay, even if you can't have a 4-year stay, it's like overseas. If you only have a 1 or 2 year contract, that doesn't mean you can't connect with that community. You can. You just need to realize that's the reason why you're here.
Yeah, Joe, you played all over, include in the NBA. You played overseas like Tyler, and then you played for some teams in the states too that weren't in the NBA. So, I mean, you had a long career, Joe. I mean, you started in 2001. You played all the way up until 2012. So, you have a ton of experience past college, and we think of great basketball players at Penn State like Taylor Battles, and then on the women's side like the Kelly Mazzanis. When I was there, Maggie Lucas. You played a long time, and I always liked, because I remember when you played in the NBA too, and the fact that there was a Penn State guy that, I mean, your NBA highlights, Joe, I mean, you shot a three like it was nothing. You probably had your eyes closed. I mean, you were just draining them.
I tell people all the time the NBA was the easiest place I ever played offense. And it's the truth. I mean, at the time there were like 2 or 3 teams, and that's where like I did miss the window a little bit, because people always like, you'd be great in the NBA now, and I'm like, yeah, but there's dudes now, they're guarding the perimeter at 7'3". And back then, those same guys were sitting in the lane, and I'd come off a screen wide open, and I was like, this is a joke. Like, I could do this all day. But very few coaches understood how to use that skill. That was my reality. So, Scott Skiles did, and then he left, and then I have the coach Frank Johnson who came in who didn't want to shoot as many threes, which was stupid. I mean, there's no getting around it. It was stupid. I was shooting like 42, 43% from three. But then to your point about traveling the world and just getting opportunities, I always tell people I wanted to play in the NBA for 12 years. I wanted to be Steve Nash, but shooting more threes, actually. That's how I wanted to play the game and change the game. Didn't get that chance, but I did get a chance to learn basketball in such a variety of settings that has led to me to have more stories and just more understanding of the game than I would have if I had just gotten what I wanted, right? So I am really thankful for my experience and traveling some different places, living in some different communities. I had two of my kids were born overseas, but learning how to play the game in a variety of settings, but also to represent diverse people, right? You go from Spain to Italy to Poland to Greece to Turkey, right? Like there's cultural differences. There are all these different things, but then there's basketball, and you can connect with these communities through basketball, and that's what I learned how to do. And I look back and I often wonder what the heck was I should have kept playing because I didn't realize how hard it was to make money doing normal stuff.
Yeah, going into the real world.
Yeah.
Austin, you want to ask about who he played with? Joe, we're going to get back into your coaching career and everything, but Austin, you want to ask him about who he played with in the NBA?
Yeah. Obviously, we talked about your time with the Lakers. What was it like being on that squad with all the elite players they had? Kobe, perhaps. Some of those other guys. What was your experience with those guys?
Well, I always tell people my first job, we mentioned earlier when we were talking before we started recruiting, like Jerry West just passed away, and he was a big reason why I was with the Lakers. So my first job, I have Jerry West helping me in my ear about what I need to do in practice. I have Phil Jackson as the coach. I have Shaq, Kobe, Brian Shaw, Mitch Richmond, Derek Fisher, Lindsey Hunter, Robert Ory, right? This ridiculous, like one of the greatest teams ever. And this is my first job. So there's nowhere to go but down after that, actually. I would have preferred just smaller steps down, but I was just a kid, man. I was 22. I had no idea. I was just a kid who loved playing ball. And then all of a sudden, here I am with the Lakers, right? And it was a good group. Kobe was actually the most difficult one. I think, he was only 23 or 24 at the time. He was still young in his career. So he was in that stage where he was trying to like assert himself a little bit more. It was Shaq's team still, really. He was the main cog. But like I learned, I was there for like 2 or 3 months, right? And I learned so much in that time. And I didn't realize how much I learned until later. Because I'm somebody who's like, I'm a questioner by nature. I just question everything and soak everything in, and I'm asking stuff of people and just, why would we do this or whatever. And, we're running the triangle offense and things are centering around Shaq, and we would go into timeouts and Phil Jackson would draw something up and I'd go, wow, that's really good. That's going to work, like, duh, it should. But, I wasn't used to that. In college, even if you call a play, it often doesn't work because there's a variety of reasons for that, but just learned a ton. And it was a really good group because they were veterans who were secure, right? So with the exception of Kobe, who'd give me a hard time sometimes, everybody else was great. Like everybody else was like looking out for you, right? As secure veterans, and you could pick their brain and any number of things. So that was an amazing experience. And as I always tell kids, always ask me, you played with the Lakers? I always say, not as long as I wanted to, but yes, I did. And then I had that, an interlude of like 3 games in an ABA team playing for Scott Brooks. And it was about 2 or 3 weeks. And we averaged like 140 points a game, like in that league. I averaged like 37 and 14. And then boom, I was back in the NBA, like 14 assists. We're just transition oriented. It was exactly the way I always wanted to play basketball. And then I go play for Scott Skiles of the Suns, and there's Penny Hardaway, and there's Stephon Marbury, and there's Dan Marley's in his last year, and Tony Delk and all these guys, also another real good group. But Skiles got let go about 5 weeks after I got there, And then Johnson took over and didn't want to shoot as many threes, so you're not going to play me as much, right? So that was my experience with that season. And naturally at the time, like I thought, no big deal. I'm going to be back here next year. And then, a couple decisions, maybe I should have gone to another team or as a free agent, and it just didn't work out. And you get cut a couple times, and then eventually you just go, you know what, I'll just make a career overseas. And that's kind of how it all worked out. But those first couple years, first season in particular, right? I went to camp I played summer league for Thibodeau. I played in training camp. I had Riley for a couple weeks, Pat Riley for a couple weeks. I had a rookie, Eric Musselman, for a couple weeks in the NBA, believe it or not. It was just a wild ride where, I always tell people, if you want to be great at anything, diversify your learning as much as possible within that sphere. That's what ended up happening for me, right? As I just play for this coach for a couple weeks or a couple months, and then boom, I'm somewhere else. And then boom, I'm somewhere else. And then I'm in a different country. And it's like they do things differently. And, I had a coach in Poland who, once I get hot, he would just clear out the whole floor for me and just go one-on-one and shoot, do whatever you want. And I'm like, this guy's crazy, but I love it. And then I've had the next month, 6 months later, or 4 months later, I'm playing for somebody else. So my career is a wild ride. It was also like a matter of survival, right? You're just trying to survive in the basketball world and provide for your family eventually, as we had kids and we're moving all over the place. But in the midst of that, boy, did I learn a lot, and I met a lot of people and certainly enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah,
and clearly the Lakers didn't need me to win their third championship. They released me. Maybe there were some luxury tax issues that even with my little paltry salary, but they were right. They didn't need me because they did win it that year.
They had a pretty okay roster as you rattled off. They had some pretty okay players.
They did.
Yeah, Joe. I mean, so I do remember when you played for the Suns, and were you one-on-one with Michael Jordan? You guys, I know you played
I actually
down.
have a picture somewhere in my house. I think we got to rehang it because we're moving stuff around, but of me guarding Jordan.
Wow.
So my joke was he was like 0 for 1 against me, I think. And it was all he did was just a turnaround jumper, and he just missed it because there wasn't much I could do to get that. But I had one picture in my house a friend of mine took when he was at the game, and we were switching guard to guard. So obviously they're going to use my man to screen Jordan's man and then put me on him. And he went baseline. I think I fouled him a little bit, and ball went out of bounds. And I remember saying or whispering to somebody, "That's right, I get that call," right? But then he ended up hitting the game winner on us later that game, and the game before he had 41, and he had a game winner. I played against him in Stockton, which to me were like we played 2 games against each. Like to me, those were like, wow, that's a big deal. Other people, like, I'm like, man, I'm just going at people. That's the way I was wired. It was like, it's Kobe. I don't give a rip about Kobe. Like I would have played against him in high school. Like I'm going. That's what's hard for people to understand. Context is like, I don't give a rip about. Like I respected the heck out of Kobe, but he's a year older than me. I'm going at this guy, right? Like that's the way I thought. The moment you lose that, you can't compete. Now, on the other hand, though, Jordan, Stockton, it was like, whoa, like these guys, they were like 40, 41 years old at the time. And I'm like, these guys are legends. All right. I was a little young child watching these guys. So even though I respected all these guys, like those two were different to me when we played against them for sure.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things too, when obviously they had as much success as they had, and obviously Jordan being Jordan, there is like that degree of like respect that you have for all of your competitors that you go against. But then like with those guys, especially watching them growing up, like when you were younger and all this kind of thing, there is like a degree of like reverence sometimes of like, wow, like this is actually happening. Like This is bona fide legend, greatest player ever to play. Like I'm actually here. This is really happening in real life. That's kind of what I would imagine it would be like.
But even with Stockton, I remember like on both ends, like defensively, I couldn't keep track of him. He was so smart. It was like, where did he go? He was moving like half speed, and it's like I just lost the guy. Like he just boop, quick cut, back screen, then cross screen. Then he's up. I'm like, where the heck is he? But on the other
Slippery.
hand, I was like, this guy can't guard me. In a million years, he can't guard me. Like, give me the ball. And, it's like a self-discovery thing where it's like, oh, no, he literally can't, right? He can't. He's not quick enough. And he's a great defender because he's all-time steals leader, but a lot of that was off the ball at the time. I had a 3-point shot and I was pretty quick off the bounce. Let's get him in a ball screen. There were those things that was like, man, I wish I had really understood that at the time because I kind of did. But when you're young, you're still figuring that out. Like you're still even figuring out how good you actually are. And as I tell a lot of good players, like you're better than you realize you are. And that's actually a problem. You need the best area for growth is often recognizing how good you already are, right? Because growing up, you're always like, I got to get better, I got to get better, I got to get better, not good enough. And it's like eventually you got to turn the corner and go, actually, I can shoot with anyone in the world. So why don't I just accept that? Yeah, I am a world-class shooter. Duh. Everybody else knows. Why don't I know? So there were a lot of those moments for me throughout my career, and I remember that was one of like, this is easy. I just wish I got a chance to shoot like 1,000 more of those threes. That would have been nice.
Yeah, it seems like you had a little touch of bad luck with some coaching turnovers and different philosophies and maybe some guys that were a little inflexible, we'll say, with the scheme and then setting things up and then shooting more three balls and all that kind of stuff. But like a lot of people have obviously already told you, you mentioned it earlier, today's game different, but you also have your perimeter defenders and all that kind of stuff. So it's a little bit more challenging. You're not getting nearly as many open looks as you did, when you were playing. So games obviously evolved. The athletes are
Well,
incredible.
the other way to approach it is like we're always stupid, right? And this is what people don't recognize a lot of times. And like this shaped my career, right? Because my high school coach was ahead of his time, and we averaged 85 a game my senior year. We would like there were games we had 10 threes at the half, right? Like my brother and I had 8 of them, right? Like it was insane in a high school 32-minute game, but it wasn't insane. He was the smart one, and everyone thought he was crazy. Then you get to the NBA, and no offense against Frank, but he's telling me a 42% 3-point shooter not to shoot. He doesn't want to shoot as many threes so he can take mid-range contested jumpers with Steph, who is an amazing player in his own right, but Steph's only shooting 46%. Like, what are we talking about here? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And it was doctrine back then. So again, it's no offense against him or anybody else. Like it was just normal. Everyone thought that way. So that has been a big shaper in my career. I mean, a year after I was with the best team in the world, I was in the best team in the world. I was on the best team in the world in November 2002. In November 2003, I got cut from a CBA team in Gary, Indiana, which at one time was the murder capital of the world. So I was spared probably, but the basketball world doesn't make sense, right? Like 10 days before I got cut, I had like 29 and 10 assists. Like, I don't know what they were thinking. There was all sorts of weirdness, right? That's generally the world we live in. But I always tell people like that has been formative in my experience because I'm a questioner by nature. But a lot of people just accept stuff as like, well, this is the way it's done. And I'm like, yeah, well, that was the way it was done 20 some years ago. And we all know it was stupid. So what makes you think we have all the answers now? We're doing numerous things that are stupid. So what should we be questioning and changing to be the future, not the past? Right. So a lot of my experiences was even overseas, a lot of my experience was I really had to, I tell people, I really had to fight to be myself as a player. I always did, right? And Coach Dunn gave me a ton of freedom here. But people would always say, and I've joked with Coach about this, people would always say, like, well, he gave you the green light. And I was like, I don't know if he gave it to me. I think I just took it. I just took it and I ripped it down and I took out the red light and I took out, maybe I sometimes had the yellow light. It was just only green. It was like, that was me saying, no, I'm going to shoot fadeaways. I'm going to shoot deep threes. This is just the way I do things. I'm always fighting for what I can be great at. So that has been formative in my experience. And it's probably why I coach a little differently and think a little differently in general was like, I was always having to fight to do what I was great at. really anybody, anywhere in the world. There were a handful of coaches who understood it, and most of them didn't, and I just had to keep plugging along.
Yeah, I think, and kind of getting into a little bit of the coaching side now, I think that has a lot of value on a staff and for a program because, you know, the way I look at it, and this isn't exclusive to basketball, so it, kind of innervates all sports. If you're so locked into, well, this is the status quo of how we do things, and there's no outside thoughts, creativity comes down, and in my opinion, predictability goes way up
That's
because
right.
you know what everyone's doing. You know this is the status quo. This is the roadmap. It makes you easier to defend in any sport. So my other presumption would be a little bit out of the box thinking, maybe a little bit more creativity, a little bit more free flowing. Like, hey, I kind of want you to be yourself and maximize maximize your own talents of what you're best at. That's probably fun for players too, which I think has a lot of value, especially with recruiting and all these types of things in college. What are your thoughts on that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I've always said like my last like 5 to 6 years of my professional career, I was really preparing to coach. I knew that I was going to coach, and I was being very purposeful about it, reading and writing stuff and just really questioning things to an even greater degree. And I always felt like the golden rule in coaching is just coach the way you wanted to be coached, which for me was like, hey, here's an idea. Give me some things you need me to do, and then sit your butt down and just let me play, and I'm going to win for you. And as I got older, that really was true. It was like you're hiring me to win for you. I'm good at this. You might not work exactly the way you think, but trust me, it'll work. That's why I'm here. You're paying me good money. Just let me win. So I have taken that and applied that to everything. I think the difference though too is because I've been everywhere. It's really hard to teach or to do something or even approve of something, right, as a coach if you haven't done it. So, if you haven't done it yourself or haven't like taught it at some level, right, even if it's a eighth grade team and you pressed all the time or whatever, you've experienced it in that regard. You coached it. Um, the cool thing for me, and this is why I'm not like overly attached to, I'm attached to scoring a lot. That's about it, right? How that works itself out or how we do it, I'm not really attached to like one thing. There's principles to me. I wrote a book called Offense Wins that are like principles for just offense, no matter what you want to do. And I think there's a lot of wiggle room in that because in my experience, like I remember after I got cut from that one CBA team, I went to another CBA team in Rockford, Illinois, and we were like the system, like pressing. And the last game I played in Idaho, the final score was 150 to 147 or something, and I had 24 points and 27 assists in the game. And go back, and I get on a flight to go to Greece, to make a lot more money and to play for a better team. And I show up to Greece and they're calling plays all the time. So I just went from, the Heat or no, the Warriors. I did a touring team in China. Then I went to the Warriors, and then I went to this Rockford team. Then I went, or the Gary team, then the Rockford team. Boom, I'm in Greece. EuroLeague team. And I'm flying around in transition thinking it's half speed. And they're looking at me like, yo, slow down. And I'm like, oh, okay. I can slow down a little bit, but you're going to use me in this transition thing too, because I'm pretty good at it and you'll figure that out. Right. But I had to find my way in that. So, and I had to make sure we won enough and got at least some money from these Greek guys who were always late and hiding in back rooms with cash and all sorts of other stories I got. Um, but the point is, like, there's different ways of doing things, right? And then I think that summer I went and played for Thibodeau, who still coaches the way he always coached, like mismatch, two-man game, get the matchup you want, attack it like this, let's go. Keep it super simple on offense. You better play your tail off on defense. Boom, we're doing that for 2 weeks. And then now I'm in Italy playing for another coach who's totally of a different mindset. And now I got to navigate that. So for me, that was just really formative from an educational standpoint and a coaching standpoint of like, No, I know what I want to do, but it's not like it has to be done exactly the way I want. And I think players like that. They like having just, I call it just wider boundaries, so to speak. Like, doesn't mean there's no boundaries. There's always boundaries. But they're a lot wider than coaches make it out to be. And I think a lot of times as coaches, um, it's easy to get stuck in what I call it like the matrix, right? You're stuck in the matrix. This is the way to do things. This is the way you play. This is the way you play offense. This is the way you. What if it's not? And that's just kind of where I live. And I question my own stuff plenty as a coach, but I think that makes me better and hopefully makes the people around me better and ultimately make our team better here now and in the future.
Yeah, I looked up your winning record at Rowan, Joe, and you started your coaching career in 2014. And I actually listened to an episode recently on Steve Jones. It was your brother. He was talking about you, and he said that it wasn't that you didn't get a fair shake. You were just ahead of your time, like you spoke about in terms of shooting the three ball and playing ball from the perimeter. And it's crazy to think about that was something that was ahead of time at your when you played. And you're definitely a pioneer of that type of play. But he also said, and I've from what I read, just like you just said, Joe, you were preparing to be a coach, and you started in 2014, and your record, I just had it up. I'm sure you remember, but it was 114 and 54. I did the math. It's actually a better winning percentage than Joe Paterno, so that's pretty cool.
I got more chances. We got more games.
True. Yeah.
And I actually left before I could really get it up because now we were ready to roll with some more, 27-3 seasons. That's when you get that winning percentage up to 75. Yeah. And I left too soon because that's what we were ready to do. But then, I mean, the part of the reason I went to Rowan is it's home.
Yep.
Right? I'm kind of tired. I don't want to do this coaching thing the same way other people do. I always tell people we talked about community, right? Like I'm better as a soldier when I'm fighting for home. Like I was a kind of a mercenary who had to learn how to engage in communities as a pro. And that just gets tiresome. When you're changing all the time, it's like, no, I want to settle in and just fight for my home.
Yeah.
Rowan was home for me and Penn State's home for me. So, I love doing that. But Rowan was also a great place to tinker. I always joke, my players, when I first started coaching, we would come up, I would just, we wanted to play super fast, and our defense was, I actually spent a lot more time on defense than people think. And, we did a lot of different things, in pressure and rotations and trapping and trying to be really disruptive, but speed up the game. And my players early on would be like, where'd you get this? And I was like, I don't know. And I'm the head coach. They're like, what do you mean you don't know? I'm like, they said, who else does this? I said, I don't know. I don't know if anybody does this. And, I said, well, we do this. Like, this is how we do it. And you guys are the ones figuring it out. And it works, and it's going to work even better. And fortunately, we won a championship in year 3, so they actually believed me. But that was the beauty of being at the Division III level. I'd always joke, like, it's a Wednesday night, it's 1:30 a.m., and I'm frustrated about this game. It should have been better, and I'm literally the only one on the globe that cares. My boss is like, yeah, you're way exceeding our expectations. Our players, there's a couple of them that might be up. Most of them are fine. My wife and kids are in bed. They're like, this is not a big deal. But it was to me. Right. So it's a great place to learn. It's a great place to experiment. And fortunately, we were able to have a lot of success and score a lot of points, which is always
Yeah.
Like, hey, that's what I've always been known for. I might as well keep that up.
Yeah, that was definitely your thing, Joe. Scoring points and shooting a three ball and everything like that. You're an offensive guy. And so following the current team with Coach Rhodes, and you're an assistant to the head coach, he was okay with you speaking your mind and calling things out that you don't agree with. And I think that's why you're such a great fit with Coach Rhodes, and why you're such a great fit at Penn State, because in my opinion, and I think a lot of people think this, talking to Rob Oshinsky too, he was hoping you would be the next head coach too, but I think you're going to be the next guy at Penn State, the next head coach. I hope it works out with Coach Rhodes, and it definitely seems to be going that way. But you came back to Penn State. Not only are you at home again, but you're with Coach Rhodes. You're pretty much his right hand man. Can you speak a little bit more on how that's going? And then I know also wanted to talk about the NIL landscape to finish up here. What's that experience like right now, being in the thick of it?
Yeah, no, it's been tremendous. I've always had a ton of respect for Coach, and really just this entire staff, right? Like I always say to people, I always want to be the best learner I possibly can be. I want to be the quickest learner and the best learner. I want to soak everything in. And when you're surrounded with people you can learn so much from, like that's the environment I want to be in. So it's like that's Coach number one, right? Because he's a great head coach. He's secure. He's strong in what he believes. He empowers other people, right? Like there's not many people like that, right? He is special. And a lot of people don't know this, but I first met him when I was in high school. Actually, he was speaking at Susquehanna after being a D3 All-American, national champion, and John and I were the demonstrators, and that was when I first met him, and I immediately was like, "Yo, I want to be like this guy," right? I've literally looked up to him in that regard since then, right? I've shared that with him, and then I'd see him now and again, and saw him a couple years ago when he was at VCU, and he came to some games we were playing down at Macon. So it's just funny how it all works, right? Like it was easy for me to look up to him then. It's easy for me to look up and learn from him now, because he's a great coach and he's a great guy and he's a good family man and all these things that you want to be. But then also he's got a great staff, right? You have all these guys who are really, really good at what they do, and plenty of them are good at things that I'm not good at. That I'm like, okay, I want to learn from them, right? And that's a great situation to be in, right? That you can't really script. That I'm super, super thankful for. So to be able to work, under him and with just a great staff that have more coaching experience than I do, right? Because I was playing so long, I'm into this game a little bit later, so it's really been great, and I think, we're on the right track, and soaking things in, and I believe in what we're doing. So he's known that from the beginning of just like, I'm in on your vision, right? There's a common vision of just like who we want to be and who we think Penn State basketball needs to be. And it's like when he talks about being bold, different, and aggressive, it's like I've been talking about that for 20 some years. I'm like, man, I'm all in on that. Right. So it's like you tell me what you need and I'm in. And then of course when he said, I want you to focus on offense, I'm like, well, that's not real hard to talk me into that. Nobody's had a hard time talking me into that. And working with him also has been great, because like he'll challenge me on stuff that I wasn't necessarily good at, that I kind of wanted to be better at from a coaching perspective, even just offensively, of like, well, what are we going to call that, or how are we going to teach that? And I'm like, okay, it refines my thinking. And then you're surrounded with guys who are really good at recruiting and organization and all these different things. So I've been super blessed. I think all the guys on the staff know I just have a ton of respect for everybody, and just trying to learn a lot, and see the vision become reality, right? We want to have this great program and see the community excited about basketball, and that's what Coach is about, and that's what our program's about. So it's easy just to hop on board and say I'm all in.
So
yeah,
obviously,
just one
go ahead,
if I can, one quick follow up on that one. It does seem to me in the last couple of years, since Pat Kraft has got here as the AD, that kind of a lot more alignment has been funneled into football, also basketball, kind of everywhere, because he's a competitive guy. He was a former athlete, super competitive guy in his own right. How is that kind of top down support been? Is my perception from the outside accurate?
Yes, refreshing. I've seen it all the way through. all the highs and the lows. You know, people had told me, and again, Pat hadn't been here that long before we made this switch. I mean, he was probably only 9 months in, but I had numerous people tell me like you were gonna love Pat Kraft at Penn State. And I had a 7-minute conversation with him, probably 10-minute conversation with him right after Coach and I talked about me coming back as on his staff. And I was like, okay, I'm all in, right? And it's like it only took him like 5 minutes, like 2 minutes in. I'm like, okay, everyone telling me this is true. And then you meet Neely, and you're like, oh, she loves basketball, and you're like, they have a vision, right? They have a vision. There's a commonality of vision, and Coach saw that, and it doesn't mean there won't be bumps in the road, but it's just really easy to hop on board, and that's why I'm just super thankful because I've always said that when I always say like because I'm a Penn State basketball guy, like I can kind of trash on our own program, right, and be honest, like I've lived it, and I always tell people I've been as frustrated as anybody else, right? I've invested into the program, so when we would fall off a cliff every time there's a coaching change, it was like, oh my gosh. So I understand the angst of Penn State people when they're like, oh shoot, we're gonna fall off the cliff again. It's gonna take us years to get back. And it's like, no, when you know Coach and then you know Pat and you know the people around him and administration and above board, you're like, no, we're not falling off a cliff, right? It doesn't mean it won't be easy, or it won't be, that it will be easy, but we'll get there because there is alignment and that's exciting, I think, for us, but across the board, particularly with the changing landscape and everything that's going on.
Yeah, that's awesome. Awesome to hear that all the noise from the outside is accurate on the inside as well. Because again, there's no real good reason to make the argument that a place like Penn State, the basketball program, should fall off after a coaching change. It's Penn State University. It is what it is. You went here. We all went here. We know how special this place is. So I'm happy to hear all that. And I do presume that we're going to have quite a bit more success in that basketball program.
I believe it.
Joe, one last question for you. Bit of a curveball. Then we'll cut this isn't live, so I'm going to be editing this a little bit, cutting it up. What are your thoughts on Caitlin Clark and what she's doing for basketball right now?
Well, I have a daughter who's 16 who likes to shoot from 27 feet. So I think she's been tremendous, right? I think that, like you said, like she captures people's imagination, right? I think she captures young girls' imagination too, of like, I can do that. I think that's an underestimated thing, right? And it's a lot of people make it out to be a racial thing, and I think that's understandable but wrong. I think it's a special skill set thing as much as anything, right? Is when these kids or adults see someone shooting from 28, 29 feet, right? It captures your imagination in a way that's like, wow, that's unique. That's different. Can I do that? That's the same thing with Steph Curry, right? Is that's a different thing to the game that people are like, I might be able to do that even if I'm a 5'6" high school guard, right? I'm going to work on that and get you interested in basketball maybe in a way that didn't have you interested before when you can't relate to the 6'5" girl inside who's just making layups. That's not most people, right? So even though she's a 6-foot guard who's plenty big, right? She's a guard, right? And there's more people who are going to copy her and be interested in basketball and try to copy that skill set. I think it's just great for the game in general and certainly good for the women's game, which, like I said, is personal to me because I have a daughter who loves the game. Naturally, people always need talking points. It's the danger. I always tell my brother as a broadcaster, you're paid to talk. That's dangerous. So they're always going to come up with some controversial things about it. But I think in general, it's been good and it'll continue to be good for the game.
Yeah,
and I've enjoyed watching her play. We've tuned in way more to women's basketball because of her. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think she's one of the most. It's crazy to think, coming from college women's basketball into the WNBA. I think she's one of the most electrifying athletes we've seen in any sport. I mean, the viewership for the WNBA draft was, I think, 3 times the NBA Finals game 1.
Yeah.
So that's insane. That
Yep.
it's getting that much attention.
Yeah, and it's good. It's cool.
But that'll be Penn State basketball here soon.
Absolutely.
With your addition, Joe. So, Joe, we'll hop off here. I'm gonna stop the recording, and then we'll talk to you a little bit. But Joe, also, if you don't have anything else, thank you for coming on, Joe. It was great to talk to you. Thank you for everything you did for Penn State basketball and everything you continue to do. Austin and I are definitely looking forward to watching you guys have a ton of success and being a football and basketball school like some of the other schools in America. So
my pleasure. I'm hoping it's just the start. That's what we say around here. Coach and I say it all the time. Like, it's just getting going, just the start.
Very exciting stuff.
All right, Joe. Thanks again.
Thank you, guys.